My Japanese friends of modern times, objecting to the kimono, said, well, you can't run for a bus in a kimono. All right, you can sure run for a bus in a Philippine sarong, because it gives you complete freedom of your legs. Get them right up, either way. Because you see, it's essentially a divided skirt, very floppy, made of cotton, and it wraps around your waist, and you tuck it in, and you can secure it with a safety pin. And over it, you simply wear a colorful shirt. I don't know whether this matches very good, but at any rate, one just sees how many different jazzy things you can put together. But this, the sarong with variations, is worn all over South Asia. But this particular Philippine design with the divide is the most comfortable, the most elastic that I've ever discovered. And I do not know any more comfortable form of dress in the world than this. Now, the thing is, you can make it of any material. You could make this same thing out of heavier materials, say out of worsted, out of silk, in order to be warm in cold weather, and have a completely comfortable and, I think, reasonably dignified form of clothing. Well, now, what is the problem with us? What's the problem with Western man and even Western woman, that they dress so damned uncomfortably? I've thought about this a great deal because it comes down to some pretty fundamental philosophical matters. And I've discovered that one of them is this, that when people get up in the morning, they put on a bathrobe. After a little time goes by, they feel slightly guilty. And why do they feel slightly guilty? Because when you've got loose-fitting clothes on, you may have a slight suspicion that you don't really exist. In other words, you're not strapped in. Because all people of action wear big belts, like military, you know? Boots, things that clutch you tightly. And then you feel, because of the pressure upon your skin, you're really there. Now, this is a very serious mistake, especially for soldiers. I maintain that the German army lost 2 world wars because of the goose step, because of military pomp and swagger, because of such things as brass bands and close order drill, because a really effective army should be invisible and inaudible. But you cannot get men who are on the machismo kick, who have to prove that they're men, to be invisible and inaudible. But a truly effective army, an army of guerrillas, should dress with complete comfort, complete practicality, and no kind of tying themselves together in knots so that the pressure on you will assure you that you're there, because after all, that's like sleeping on a bed of nails. But a great many people in our culture don't feel that they are really alive unless in some way they are uncomfortable or suffering. And the reason for that is that we have a profound built-in sense of guilt about our existence. You see, and we have a profound sense of guilt about our existence because we feel that we don't really belong to the universe. There was a wonderful story about a Japanese mystic, a kind of wandering holy man, who one night stopped in a Buddhist temple for shelter. And he went up to the high altar, and there were all these kneeling cushions which the priests use for celebrating the service, and he arranged them all and made a comfortable bed and went to sleep. And early in the morning, the priest came in to celebrate the early morning service and saw this apparent bum lying on all the cushions in front of the altar. And he said, "What are you doing here? Such disrespectful conduct in front of the altar." And the holy man looked up at him and said, "Oh, so? You must be stranger here. You cannot belong to the family." And so likewise, in an Italian church, little children were running around in and out of the pews, ducking back and forth while their mother was offering candles at the shrine of St. Anthony. And 2 American spinsters from New England were viewing the church. and were very shocked at the way these children were playing, and went over and touched the mother on her shoulder and said, "Don't you think these children should be controlled?" "Well," she said, "it is their father's house. Can't they pray here? Can't they play here?" See, I made a very interesting slip of the tongue. But that's a most curious thing, isn't it, you see? Our clothing, as I said at the beginning in exhibiting the business suit, is undertaker clothing, ministerial clothing, military clothing. For all those things which in our culture we cultivate an uptight attitude. Hold yourself in. Restrain yourself. Like this. But in doing this, you see, we are constantly at war with ourselves. It is as if you were moving your arm, and you want to move your arm very strongly in one way. All right, you go like that. You immediately tighten the bicep. And that would be the natural thing to do. In lifting something heavy, you immediately tighten the bicep, and up it comes. But supposing you tighten the tricep at the same time, which is the muscle here on the back, then you get this. You're fighting with yourself, you see? And although this movement may look, oh, very tough and strong, it isn't at all. Because you're fighting with yourself while you do it. Now, in this way, all the time, we have been taught to fight with ourselves because our personalities have been split. Our culture tells us that we are, on the one hand, a nasty little animal that has to be controlled and beaten into submission, and that on the other hand, we're a rational soul, which is the sort of higher self which is supposed to take control of the lower self. And for this reason, we're always at cross purposes with ourselves. Freud, for example, distinguished between the pleasure principle, which he located in the genital region, and the reality principle, which he located in the cortical region, in the brain. So there's a distance between these two centers. This is the pleasure center, this is the intelligence center. And because they're not in the same place, for some reason or other, it seems there always has to be a fight between them. In a plant, like a flower, its mind and its sex organ is the same place, and so it doesn't have that conflict. But in a human being, they're divided. And so we think they're divided, at least, simply because they are at a distance from each other in space. But they're not really divided at all. They look different. The head looks very different from the genitals. But in the same way, bees look very different from flowers. One flies freely in the air and buzzes, and the other is rooted to the ground and colorfully perfumes the environment, so the bee is attracted to it. But the thing is that these two very different looking things are in fact one single organism, because if there are no bees, there are no flowers, and if there are no flowers, there are no bees. They come together, as the Chinese have a phrase, to arise mutually. So in the same way, when you were born, your head and your feet, your head and your genitals arose mutually. They came in together. They are not really separate from each other. And therefore this idea that that discipline, that living an ordered life, consists in controlling yourself. That is to say, by having one self that needs to be controlled and another part of yourself which is the controlling one, is nothing but creating a conflict and a disturbance inside yourself. You have to get with yourself in order to control yourself. In other words, if I want to open my hand, it opens like that. I don't know how it does it, but it just does it like that. But if it were necessary for me to open my hand to do this, you see, and then when I had to pick up something, like, well, here's a cigar, and I need to pick it up with my right hand, so I have to do this. I mean, wouldn't that be absurd? But that's what we are doing all the time when we divide ourselves into two parts, the spiritual and the material, the angelic and rational, and the animal or irrational. And so constantly we're holding clubs over ourselves. And that is one of the reasons, therefore, why when you get up in the morning and you put on your bathrobe and you feel at ease, that after a while you begin to feel guilty. Because you feel you should be, as we say, dressed and in your right mind, so that you can go out and be a person of action. You can go to the office and feel that there it is. Now that's another thing which makes the philosopher comment in connection with clothing, is commuting. Every day in the urban areas, millions of people are absolutely wearing themselves out, tearing their nerves to distraction by going along the freeways in a car, fouling the atmosphere to do their work. And their work, you see, is completely divorced, something quite separate from their play. Now this is one of the great insanities of our civilization. Every sensible person should get paid for playing. If you don't get paid for playing, something's wrong with you. You haven't learned the art of life. And furthermore, in most kinds of business, especially clerical forms of business, where you need an office for paperwork and so on, you don't need an office if you've got a telephone. The telephone company can show you how to do anything in the world you want to do by way of business by phone, so that you can cut down the enormous amount of time wasted in rushing around commuting. You can stay at home and do your work from there. But we have got this idea that work is one thing and play is another. Therefore we have work clothes, and the business suit is not a practical form of work clothes, and we have play clothes. And I suggest, and we will develop this in future talks, that one of the most important things is to get our heads together with our genitals together with our heads, and our work together with our play, and make our life unified and one.